The interior of the black Toyota Alphard smelled of new leather, wilting white roses, and Waning's dry, powdery foundation. The air conditioning hummed, a low, sterile vibration that did nothing to clear the thick, heavy heat rising from our bodies. Waning sat in the middle row, her red silk veil thrown back over her hair rollers, her face pale under the gray-tinted windows. She was silently dabbing the corners of her eyes with a monogrammed linen handkerchief, careful not to smudge the waterproof mascara that had cost her 300 yuan at the department store. Luo Zhangyuan sat beside her, his fingers flying across the screen of Histoblit. His gold-rimmed glasses reflected the green and red lines of the stock market index. He hadn't looked at his bride since we left the apartment. To him, 40-minute delay wasn't an insult to his love. It was a black mark on his father's ledger. "My father's secretary just messaged," Jiang Yuan said, his voice flat, dry, like paper rubbing together. "Director Chang has already arrived. He's sitting at the head table with the district head. If we are not on stage by 12:30, they will leave before the second course is served." "It's not my fault," Waning whispered, her voice cracking. "The door." Qian welded the door. "And who told her to play the blocking game?" Jiang Yuan's eyes didn't leave the screen. "You wanted the excitement, Waning. You wanted the red envelopes. Now my father has to explain to the district head why his daughter-in-law was locked in her bedroom like a common thief." In the back row, Liu Xiu sat next to me. Her hands were tucked between her knees, her fingers clutching the red paper slip I had snatched from her hand and forced back into her palm. She knew what was written on that slip. She had spent the previous evening sitting at her dining table, using a calligraphy brush to write the same task on 12 identical pieces of paper, ensuring that no matter which one I drew, the result would be the same. The maid of honor must toast each groomsman 3 times, then let them carry her to the bridal suite to find the second shoe. It was a simple, elegant trap. If I refused, I was cold, unreasonable, and spoiling the wedding atmosphere. If I complied, the door to the suite would be locked from the outside, and whatever happened behind that wood panelings would be dismissed as young people having fun. Zhou Chang turned around from the front passenger seat, his left cheek waswollen, a dark red print of my fingers visible under the gray soot from the door frame. He looked at Liu Xiu, his small, wet eyes glinting with a mean, frustrated light. He had lost his dignity to a steel bar and a woman's hand. He needed to find it again before we reached the hotel. "What's that in your hand, Xiu?" he asked, his voice raspy from the smoke he had swallowed. He reached back, his thick, hairy wrist extending between the leather seats, and snatched the paper from her fingers before she could pull away. He flattened the crumpled slip against his knee. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face, his teeth gray against his soot-stained lips. "Oh," he laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Let the grooms have some fun." He looked at Liu Xiu, his eyes scanning her pale pink bridesmaid dress, the way her chest rose and fell with her rapid breath. "I didn't know you were so thoughtful, sister. I thought you were saving all your energy for your boyfriend's promotion." "No," Liu Xiu stammered, her face turning the color of curdled milk. "Zhou, I didn't write that for me." "It was in your hand," I said, my voice smooth, quiet, like oil over water. And we all agreed before we left the room. No backing out. "Right, Waning?" Waning didn't look back, but her shoulders went rigid under her red silk. She wanted the games over. She wanted her father-in-law to see her as a dutiful, quiet wife, not the center of a scandal. "Just do what the paper says, Xu," Waning said, her voice cool, distant. "Don't make things difficult for Jiang Yuan. We're already late." Liu Xiu looked at Waning, her jaw dropping slightly. She had been Waning's roommate for 3 years, her loyal shadow, the one who had helped her write the guest list and pick the flowers. She had agreed to help trap me because Waning had promised to introduce her boyfriend to Luo Zhangyuan's uncle at the district tax bureau. But in the back of a luxury van, under the cold light of a late wedding, promises are the first things to burn. The Grand Hyatt's ballroom was named the Golden Room, a vast, octagonal space carpeted in thick crimson wool that smelled of old dust and expensive detergent. Above us, 3 massive crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. Their light reflecting off the gilded pillars and the red velvet drapes. There were 50 tables, each set with white bone china, silver-plated chopsticks, and bottles of aged mutai. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck, steamed sea bass, and the sweet, heavy musk of 500 people drinking high-grade alcohol on an empty stomach. At the head table sat Director Chang. He was a thick-necked man in his late 50s. His dark hair dyed a solid, unnatural black that made his pale forehead look like marble. He wore a gray wool suit, his gold watch catching the light as he rotated his small cup of mutai between his thumb and forefinger. Next to him was Luo Jiangyuan's father, a man whose smile was as sharp and thin as a razor blade. We entered through the side doors, bypassing the grand red carpet because the schedule was already ruined. "Smile," Waning's mother whispered, her hand clamping onto my elbow like an iron claw as she nudged me toward the stage. Her breath smelled of mints and dry red wine. "The photographers are recording. Don't look like you're going to a funeral." I smiled. My teeth felt cold against my lips. On the stage, the master of ceremonies was already sweat-streaked, his microphone squealing twice as he tried to warm up the crowd. The 500 guests had been sitting for 2 hours. They were drunk, bored, and hungry. They didn't want to hear about Waning and Jiang Yuan's love story. They wanted a show. Zhou Chang and the other 5 groomsmen stood at the base of the stage, their rented tuxedos unbuttoned at the collar. Their faces flushed from the liquor had sneaked in the lobby. They looked like a pack of dogs waiting at the edge of a clearing. "Now," the MC shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Before we pour the champagne, the bridesmaids and groomsmen have a special tradition to perform. To show the harmony of the new family, our maid of honor and our best men will lead the games." Liu Xiu stood beside me, her body shaking so hard the silk of her skirt rustled like dry leaves. She looked at the stage, then at the head table, where her boyfriend was sitting with his parents. His parents were old-fashioned teachers from the province. They were already looking at her pink dress with disapproval. "Chanwo," Liu Zhu whispered, her voice tiny, desperate. "Please, let me swap with you. I'll give you my portion of the gift money. All of it." "Why would I swap?" I asked, my voice barely louder than the hum of the speakers. "You wrote the rules, Xiu. I'm just making sure you follow them." I stepped back, moving into the shadow of the giant LED screen that displayed Waning's pre-wedding photos. Images of her, looking pure, innocent, and untouched by the world. Zhou Chang ascended the wooden steps of the stage, his boots thudding against the hollow plywood. He didn't look at the crowd. His eyes were fixed on Liu Xiu. He had 3 drinks in the lobby. His shoulder still burned from his collision with the door, and his cheek was hot. He needed a victory. He needed everyone in this room to see that he was still the man who could take whatever he wanted. "Come on up, Sister Xiu," he shouted into the spare microphone, his voice booming through the hall. "The guests are waiting. Let's show them how we have fun in the city." The crowd laughed, a low, collective rumble that sounded like dry gravel rolling down a hill. At the head table, Director Chang didn't look up from his cup. They didn't stop his son either. To these men, a girl's tears at a wedding wear like the salt on their sea base, just another seasoning to make the meat taste better. I didn't watch the stage. I walked down the side steps, my flat shoes making no sound on the heavy carpet. In my purse, I had 3 things: my phone, the key to Waning's new apartment, and a small white paper receipt from the property management office. I walked toward the head table. Luo Jiangyuan's father saw me first. His eyes narrowed, his hand dropping to his plate. "What is she doing? Why isn't she on stage?" I stopped behind Director Chang's chair. The smell of his expensive sandalwood cologne was thick, mixed with the sour tang of old sweat. I leaned down, my face inches from his ear, my voice small, polite, and perfectly clear. "Director Chang," I said. He turned his head slowly, his thick eyebrows raised in a look of quiet, bureaucratic annoyance. "Yes? Who are you?" "I am Chanwo Waning's bridesmaid," I said. I wanted to apologize for the delay this morning. Your son, Joe, was so helpful. He helped us clear some structural blockages in the apartment. I placed my phone on the white linen tablecloth, right next to his gold-rimmed cup. On the screen, the video was already playing. It was a high-definition recording of Joe Chang, his face purple, his mouth open in a feral scream as he threw his shoulder against the iron-welded door of Weining's bedroom. The sound was muted, but his desperation was clear. In the background, the apartment was visible, the brand-new walls, the expensive furniture, and Weining's mother screaming in the corner. Then came the second clip. Joe Chang reaching for my shoulder, his fingers clawed, and my hand striking his face with a loud, dry crack. The red marks on his skin were clear under the bedroom's fluorescent light. Director Chang's finger stopped rotating his cup. His eyes fixed on the screen, his pupils diluting slightly as he watched his son behave like a common thug in a public hallway. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register. "It's just a small video we recorded for the family archive," I said. My voice is sweet, respectful. The property management office also has a copy. They were quite concerned about the structural integrity of the doorframe. You see, they said they might have to report the damage to the local housing bureau. I leaned a fraction closer. And of course, during the current campaign against official extravagance and public disorder, I'm sure the district head would be very interested to see how the son of the tax bureau director spends his Saturday mornings. Luo Jiangyuan's father reached for his glasses, his face turning a gray, sickly color. "Qianuo, don't be unreasonable. This is a wedding." "I am being very reasonable, Uncle Luo," I said, my smile widening. "I am just sharing a memory." I wanted to make sure Director Chang had the first copy before he sent it to the City Discipline Committee's online portal. I have the link saved on my browser. It takes only one click. Director Chang didn't look at me. He looked at his son on the stage, who was currently laughing as he pulled Liu Xiu toward a red velvet chair, his hands heavy on her shoulders. "How much?" Director Chang asked. His voice was very quiet, very cold. "I don't want money, Director Chang," I said. "I have enough. I just transferred 3,000 yuan to Sun for finding the shoe, and I still have 7,000 left to pay him. I am a very generous person." I straightened my back, my fingers smoothing the cheap tulle of my dress. "I just want you to teach your son some manners. A wedding is a happy day. We shouldn't let anyone spoil the atmosphere." Director Chang stood up. He didn't say "excuse me" to Luo Jiangyuan's father. He didn't look at the district head. He walked toward the stage, his heavy leather shoes sinking into the red wool carpet, his face a mask of iron. On the stage, Joe Chang was holding a glass of mutai, trying to force Liu Xiu to drink it from his own hand. Her makeup was smeared, her pale pink dress torn at the collar where he had grabbed her to pull her up. "Drink it," the crowd was chanting, their voices thick with alcohol. "Drink it, drink it." Director Chang ascended the steps. He walked past the master of ceremonies, who froze, his microphone held mid-air. He walked past the groomsmen, who shrank back, their red faces turning pale as they recognized the director's gray suit. Joe Chang turned around, his smile still wide. "Dad, look, we're just..." Director Chang didn't wait for him to finish. He raised his right hand, a thick, heavy hand that had signed hundreds of tax assessments, and struck his son across the face. The sound was louder than my slap. It was the sound of leather hitting wet clay. Joe Chang stumbled back, his glass of mutai flying from his fingers, shattering against the white plywood of the stage. The liquid pooled, smelling of sulfur and fermented grain. "Dad?" Joe Chang clutched his cheek, his eyes wide with a stupid, childish confusion. "Get down," Director Chang said, his voice carrying clearly through the Silenthal, even without a microphone. "Go to the car now. But the wedding. Get out." His father repeated. The 500 guests sat in absolute frozen silence. No one spoke. No owner reached for their chopsticks. Even Weining, standing near the champagne tower, looked like she had been turned to salt. I stood by the head table, my hands folded over my purse. Liu Xiu stood on the stage, her body trembling, her torn collar revealing a red mark where Joe's hand had been. She looked down at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and realization. She understood now that she had been the shield I used to hit the man who had hurt us both. The wedding continued, but the gold was gone. Luo Jiangyuan and Wei Ning stood on the stage, their vows read to a room that smelled of spilled liquor and broken glass. The district head had left before the second course was served, his chair remaining empty like a black hole at the head table. Director Chang sat in his place, his face dark, his cup filled with plain water. Wanning walked down the stage, her heavy red veil dragging behind her like a train of blood. She came to the bridesmaid table where I sat alone, drinking my warm orange juice. "You ruined it," she whispered, her lips pale under her red lipstick. "My marriage. My family's face. You ruined everything, Chanuo." "I didn't weld your bedroom door from the inside, Wei Ning," I said, setting my glass down exactly in the center of the paper coaster. "And I didn't tell Joe Chang to touch your office girls. I just made sure everyone saw what you were willing to pay for your new life." I stood up, picking up my purse. "I'm leaving now," I said. "I have to transfer the remaining 7,000 yuan to Sun. A promise is a promise, after all." I walked out of the golden room, my flat shoes silent on the red carpet. Behind me, the sound of Wei Ning's wedding march began again, but it sounded thin, reedy, and very far away. The marble stairs leading down to the Hyatt's service entrance were wet with Athen, greasy sleet that didn't quite freeze. The air smelled of diesel, exhaust from the idling shuttle buses and the sour, heavy steam rising from the kitchen vents below. Sun was standing near the service elevator, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his rented trousers. He was smoking a cheap, filterless cigarette, his shoulders hunched against the wind. In his left hand, he held Wei Ning's ruined red satin shoe, wrapped in a translucent white plastic grocery bag. He saw me walking down the steps, and his posture changed. He didn't smile. He didn't call out with that easy back-slapping familiarity he had used in Wei Ning's living room. He looked at me the way a street dog looks at someone carrying a heavy stick. He had seen Director Chang slap his own son on that stage. He had seen the district head leave his seat without touching his soup. He wasn't stupid. He knew the wind had changed, and he knew who had brought the draft. "Miss Xia," he said, dabbing the cigarette butt against the wet concrete before throwing it into the drain. "You have the shoe," I said, stopping 3 steps above him. "I have it." He lifted the plastic bag. The red silk was visible through the thin plastic, stained with black grease from his fingers and the gray dust of Wei Ning's imported latex mattress. "It's ruined. The heel is loose." "It doesn't matter," I said. I pulled out my phone. The screen was cold against my thumb. I unlocked the screen, opened the banking application, and entered his account number. The green light of the interface reflected in his eyes as he watched my fingers. I tapped the screen once. 7,000 yuan. A second later, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out with trembling fingers, his thumb dabbing the screen until the transaction record appeared. The green checkmark was bright, clean, and indisputable. "You're a woman of your word," he said, his voice dropping into a low, respectful murmur. "I always pay my debts, son," I said. "And I expect others to pay theirs. If Director Chang asks who told you where the shoe was." "I found it myself," he said quickly, his eyes darting to the service door behind him. "I'm a greedy bastard. Everyone in the bureau knows I dig through a concrete floor for 500 yuan, let alone 10,000. I saw a tear in the mattress, and I ripped it. It's my character. No one else has anything to do with it." "Good," I said. "Keep the shoe. Or throw it in the trash. It's served its purpose." He nodded, tucked his phone away, and walked toward the subway entrance, his head low, his shoulders rounded against the sleet. He didn't look back. I looked at the concrete ledge where he had been standing. A small, dark pool of soot-stained water had collected there, reflecting the red neon sign of the Hyatt's logo above. The red light bled into the gray water, turning it the color of stale wine. By Tuesday, the silence had settled like soot over our university alumni network. The main wedding group chat, which had been buzzing for 3 months with photos of Waning's bridesmaids' gifts. Her flower arrangements and her custom-designed invitations went completely dead at exactly 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. No one posted photos of the banquet. No one congratulated the groom. Then, at 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, a new chat was created. It was named simply Class of 20. It had 48 members. Waning and Luo Jiangyuan were not among them. The video of Zhou Cheng's public humiliation had found its way onto the internal network of the District Tax Bureau by Monday morning. It hadn't been uploaded to a public short video platform. That would have been too crude, too easily taken down by a public relations firm. Instead, it had been sent directly to the anonymous tip box of the city's Municipal Discipline Inspection Committee, attached to a detailed list of Zhou Cheng's recent expenditures, including his leased BMW and his frequent visits to the private club on the 4th Ring Road. The response was quiet, rapid, and clinical. On Wednesday, Luo Jiangyuan's father's construction company received a formal notice of a comprehensive tax audit spanning the last 3 fiscal years. The coincidence of the audit happening 3 days after the wedding was the only topic of conversation among the local business owners, who frequented the Hyatt Stia Room. Luo Jiangyuan's father was a practical man. He had spent 30 years building his business on the grease of local officialdom. He knew that when the tax bureau director's son is publicly disgraced at your son's wedding, you do not offer apologies. You offer a sacrifice. The Luo family locked Waning out of the 3 million yuan apartment on Wednesday afternoon. Waning's mother had gone to the Luo family's villa in the western suburbs, demanding to see Jiangyuan, screaming about the dowry and the marriage certificate. But the heavy iron gates had remained shut. The security guards, men Waning had hired to stand at the entrance of her wedding to keep out the low-class relatives, stood on the other side of the bars, their faces expressionless as they recorded her mother's breakdown on their phones. The world Waning had built with 15 years of calculation had dissolved in 72 hours. It hadn't collapsed with a roar. It had simply slipped away like sand through a wet fist. On Thursday evening, the rain turned to solid sleet, tapping against the single-paned window of my rented room like a handful of small gravel. My apartment was 40 square meters, located on the 5th Ring Road, behind an old diesel locomotive depot. The walls were thin, painted a cheap, chalky white that rubbed off on your coat if you leaned against it. Every morning at 5, the pipes in the corner would clank and groan, a loud, metallic shiver. That sounded like a heavy chain being dragged across iron. I was sitting at my wooden desk, drinking hot water from a cracked ceramic mug. When the knock came, it was a weak knock, erratic, lacking the sharp authority that Waning usually used when she visited my old dormitory. I didn't hurry. I took another sip of my water, set the mug down on a cork coaster, and walked to the door. I opened it. Waning was standing in the dim, yellow light of the concrete corridor. The smell of cheap coal smoke and wet laundry hung in the air between us. She wasn't wearing her custom-tailored wool coat or her gold-threaded scarf. She had on an old down jacket from our sophomore year, the one with the frayed cuffs and the broken zipper we had shared during the winter of the flu epidemic. Her hair was damp, stuck to her forehead in dark, greasy strands. Her face was-scrubbed clean of makeup, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow, her lips blue from the draft coming up the stairwell. She looked 19 again. She looked like the scholarship girl who used to sit next to me in the library, sharing a single bowl of instant noodles because her father had lost his job at the state-owned textile mill. "Qianuo," she said, her teeth clicked together, her breath rising in a thin gray mist. "Come in," I said. I stepped aside, leaving the door wide. I didn't offer her my slippers. I didn't take her wet coat. She walked into the center of the room, her boots, leaving a trail of gray, gritty slush on my linoleum floor. She looked around the small space, at the single bed with its clean gray cotton sheets, the bookshelf filled with old economics textbooks, the small rice cooker sitting on a wooden stool. "It's small," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You still live here. The rent is cheap," I said. leaning against the doorframe. And the water e-shot, that's enough. She turned to face me, her hands tucked deep into her pockets. Her shoulders were hunched, her chest rising and falling with a shallow, erratic breath. Jiangguan filed for divorce today, she said. She didn't cry. Her voice was flat, empty, the sound of someone who had already spent her tears on the floor of a locked Mercedes. His father's lawyers brought the papers to my mother's house. They're offering 50,000 yuan as a settlement. 50,000. The wedding dress alone cost 60,000. 50,000 is enough for 10 months' rent here, I said. You could live comfortably. She took a step toward me, her eyes wet, wide, and dark, with a desperate, childlike confusion. Why did you do it, Qiannuo? Because of Zhou Chang? Because of what they did in the room. They were drunk. You know how those boys are when they drink. It was just a game. You could have just run out of the room. Why did you have to weld the door? Why did you have to destroy my life? I looked at her, really looked at her, under the thin, cold light of my single bulb. The gold lacquer she had spent 5 years applying to her skin had completely peeled away. She was just wanting again. The girl from the suburbs who believed that if she climbed high enough, the mud on her boots wouldn't matter. You think this is about Zhou Chang? I asked. My voice was very quiet, very calm. Isn't it? She cried, her voice rising, cracking against the low ceiling. You wanted to teach them a lesson. You wanted to show everyone how strong you are. But you didn't just teach them, Qiannuo. You dragged me down with them. We were friends for 15 years. 15 years. I walked to my desk. I reached behind the stack of old textbooks and pulled out a small, red leather notebook. Its corners were frayed. The red dye peeling to reveal the gray cardboard beneath. It was the notebook I had carried during our senior year at the university. I placed it on the desk between us. Do you remember the winter of our senior year, waning? I asked. She stared at the notebook, her breath catching in her throat. The university was selecting one student from our department for the government-sponsored exchange program from Beijing. I said, my voice steady, conversational. The department head told me my paper on regional tax reform was the best they had seen in 5 years. The stipend was 30,000 yuan, enough to pay for my father's heart surgery in the provincial hospital. Waning's eyes flickered, her pupils contracting as she looked at the red leather. 2 days before the selection was announced, I continued, an anonymous letter was delivered to the dean's office. It claimed I had bought the advanced economics exam paper from a senior student. There was a photocopy of my handwriting, a forged receipt, and a detailed description of how I had supposedly cheated. The dean didn't have time to investigate. They disqualified me. They gave the spot to the second-ranked student. I didn't know about that, Waning whispered, her eyes moving from the notebook to my face. I had nothing to do with that. The letter was written on standard school paper, I said, ignoring her. But the envelope was sealed with a limited edition stamp. The year of the Ox commemorative series. Only 50 sheets of those stamps were sold at the campus post office. I went to the post office clerk 3 days later. He remembered the girl who bought them. She had long black hair, a small mole on her left collarbone, and she had paid with a 10 yuan note because her card wouldn't scan. I took a step closer to her. The smell of her wet-down jacket was sour, heavy with the scent of old rain. You went to Beijing, Waning, I said. You met Luo Jiangyuan's cousin at the university there. You used the 30,000 yuan stipend to buy your first designer bag, the one you wore when you introduced yourself to Jiangyuan's father. You built your entire life on a letter you wrote in the dark while I was sitting in the corridor of the provincial hospital, watching my father's monitor go flat because we couldn't pay the deposit for his ICU bed. She backed away from me, her boots sliding on the linoleum, until her spine hit the thin plywood of my wardrobe. The wardrobe groaned, a loose screw rattling in the wood. Qiannuo, her voice was a tiny, dry rattle. That was 5 years ago. We were young. We didn't know how the world worked. You knew, I said. You sat at my father's funeral 3 weeks later. You held my hand, and you cried louder than I did. You even gave me 500 yuan for the incense. I remember the coat you wore that day. The one you bought in Beijing with the scholarship money. It had gold buttons. They were very bright. Waning looked at me. The last of her illusions dissolving in the cold air of my room. She didn't beg. She didn't threaten. She looked at the red leather notebook on the desk, then at my hands, which were resting quietly on my apron. She understood that there was no friendship to appeal to, no shared memory that hadn't already been weighed and found wanting on my balance sheet. I had known about the stamp for 5 years. I had watched her climb, step by step, from her rented room to her 3 million yuan apartment. I had helped her select her wedding dress. I had listened to her complaints about the catering. Yi had agreed to be her bridesmaid not out of sisterhood, but because a wedding is the only place where a family's face is fully exposed to the public, ready to be cut with a single, precise stroke. "You're a devil," she whispered, her teeth clicking together. "I'm just a bridesmaid, waning," I said. "I helped you hide your shoe. I'm mad assure your wedding was lively." I walked to the door and opened it. The corridor outside was dark, the single yellow bulb flickering slowly. The draft came up from the stairwell, carrying the smell of wet coal and the cold, indifferent sleet of the northern fifth ring. "Go home, Waning," I said. "Your mother is waiting." She looked at me one last time, her face white, her eyes empty as she stepped over the threshold into the dark. Her boots made a wet, squeaking sound on the concrete stairs as she descended, step by step, into the cold. I closed the door. I turned the 3 locks, hearing the heavy iron bolts slide into the frame with a solid, reassuring click. I walked back to my desk. I picked up my mug of water. It was cold now, a thin skin of dust settling on the surface. Next to the red leather notebook, on the bottom shelf of my bookcase, sat Waning's ruined red satin shoe. The gold threads were frayed, the red silk stained with gray soot, its heel broken. I picked it up, opened the small hatch of the coal stove in the corner, and threw it inside. The red silk caught the flame instantly, a brilliant, blinding blue spark that flared once, lighting up the cold white walls of my room, before turning to quiet black ash.